In fact, coincidentally, I was in Washington on Saturday and had lunch with Foreign Minister Esko, and we had a very candid discussion about a number of issues. The Prime Minister was just meeting with the President, where he was able to try to at least extract a promise of cooperation, again, on technology and global warming and dealing with the environment, at least offering the idea that Japan is the best vehicle for approaching the United States and trying to foster change. And it was the Foreign Minister who made the case for the Prime Minister's trip through the Middle East that has followed this week. And this is where the things that I do for a living at the International Institute for Strategic Studies very much intersect with innovation, with energy and the environment, because the conflicts in the greater Middle East and the conflicts that could ensue from a lack of energy security could well contribute rather than reduce the problems and the challenges that we already face. This is not necessarily linear. We face these challenges also in the midst of trouble spots in contentious and competitive relations, and so it makes it even much more complex. All the more reason to bring us all together. I had my doubts yesterday when I arrived, though. I was the only one here, except for Pia from Sitra, and I thought, what happened to everybody in Finland? And then I realized it was the 1st of May. So Pia kindly arranged for me to quickly race down to the park and to see the happiest group of Finns I've ever seen in my life. And it was actually very heartwarming to see people enjoying themselves and very responsibly, even in that big environment of a big celebration. I could not have anticipated that you'd all then be so punctual and show up en masse and ready to ask questions and to be so attentive and polite as well. So I'm extraordinarily grateful. I want to make 5 points, or at least observations on 5 levels very briefly here. This is an inadequate way of summarizing, but it's the best I can do in trying to make sense out of the many intelligent things I've heard today. Firstly, at the global level, and here we can see that countries like Finland and Japan and indeed the United Kingdom are all adjusting to changes because of globalization and other changes in global security. We heard about the global marketplace driving new interactions, demanding change. We've heard about the need for countries to change their mindset. In response to this, just on this panel, we essentially highlighted the need for the United States to change its mindset on energy. How is that going to happen? How is that mass behavior change that Richard Halkett pointed out that we heard from this gentleman? How is that actually going to happen? It's not going to be technology driven. We heard that in the first panel. So how is this going to happen? It's going to happen through some other combination of maybe the United States identifying national interests, not in narrow parochial terms, but in the terms that Suga-san was talking about, which was there has to be a factor of what's the global contribution of your national interest. This is what Japan is doing and why they're doing a much better job of winning hearts and minds, if we can use that phrase, than, say, the United States. In the case of Finland, we heard specifically about the broader systemic adjustment capacity as a phrase that applies to Finland operating in this new global environment. Secondly, at the regional level, we heard a good deal really about certainly the European region. We didn't hear quite as much about the Asia region, but that's mostly because of time and maybe because we had participants from only one Asian country. But I think there's activity in both of these regions that bears on these issues. There also needs to be cross-regional discussions and interactions that we heard this morning. That's part of globalization, part of this global network that is being created. So as in the broadest term, Asia rises, and Asia drives more and more of the global economy and of the narrative in this century. Therefore, Western growth, which was predicated on 500 years of ability to adapt, adaptation, another mentor's book, Impact of Western Man, by William Woodruff, captured this very well several decades ago. That ability to adapt is now being adapted by the Asians. Japan has adapted very well. It adapted amazingly after defeat in World War II. Again, maybe out of necessity comes sometimes innovation. And so both Europe and Asia are now adapting again to new challenges. And we see Asia forming a strong economic community. The security community is still very much in flux, and there's still questions about it. The United States plays a critical role. The relationship between Japan and China is still tenuous, even while there have been some impressive bits of diplomacy, and there's going to be more to follow, I think, under Prime Minister Abe. here in Europe, we've definitely seen a strong economic community grow and flourish in the last quarter of century in a way that my professors at Oxford didn't predict 25 years ago. It's been very impressive on an economic scale. And now they face common challenges, though, beyond these regions. So the question is, what will Finland, what will Japan, what will the EU do to try to build the kind of networks, to the extent they can be built and sustained, to address some of the issues for both commercial and public policy ends of innovation. Thirdly, at the state level, the state is not withered away even while it's challenged. The state is still very much the most effective central organization for managing a lot of these huge problems, even if it has to find, and increasingly so, partnerships with the private sector, with universities, with civil society. We heard about the importance in the panel before last about research and development, the investment that is critical, not necessarily equal to innovation, not always well spent, sometimes underinvested, but at the same time critical for innovation. Clearly, smart innovation policies helping consumers, helping individuals and communities to make smart choices has to be part and parcel of the investment. So providing incentives to serve as a catalyst for innovation, fostering unconventional creativity, outsourcing by helping universities become these hubs, these magnets, these centers of excellence where there can be this non-hierarchical, free-range exchange of ideas, the moral insights that Professor Takeda talked about earlier. But governments also have a responsibility on the regulation side. Even though that's problematic when it comes to intellectual property, we also heard from Charles Leadbeater about the concern about putting a brake on too much regulation as well, because while you need regulation, you also have to try to prevent barriers from from innovation, even while you try to stop harmful innovation, a point that Richard Halkett made earlier in the morning. A fourth level is the community level, and here it really is a factor of the 21st century that communities are the fastest growing organization that really do challenge the state, because communities are both below the state, subnational, and they're transnational. They transcend the state. I know from somebody who follows terrorism quite closely, it is this struggle over this community that we are in a battle of what we call cyber mobilization because ideas can fly as fast as electrons can move across the internet to try to shape people's images. And when they see a picture of an atrocity, it shapes that community suddenly across the world, in different parts of the world, into action, into negative action. But here on innovation, community can be part of the solution as well. That the contemporary environment is marked by this growth of community. So the question is, how can we empower these communities, these networks, even though our own state-based bureaucracies, our own maybe large corporate and large university structures have inertial forces. They're rigid. There may be artificial structures. How do we adapt these institutions to globalization at the community level? What can the state do to foster these non-state actors, the consumers who are creating this new narrative again? And so that fifthly brings me to the individual. It does come down to the individual man and woman. And the question is, what will move the individual into action? How will, at the end we heard here, technology blend with mass behavior? What's going to bring about this mindset change that 10 years from now people will say, I can't believe anybody that my father used so much gasoline. I don't know how he did this. It's just not part of our culture anymore. Yet this will come. Innovation is largely integration, we heard this morning, more than brand new invention. So it's a synthesis as opposed to completely new knowledge. But there's also new knowledge in abundance as well. You think about the life sciences. We didn't talk about that today, but it's one of those huge growth areas that is shaping our century. We heard at lunch from Esko the famous quote from Thomas Edison about invention is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. But inspiration still matters. Inspiration can be the absolute catalyst for the breakthrough, the milestone that we need to leap over the hurdle. And then we can build the bird's nest around how the implementation of that big idea, that good idea that's out there, No country has a lot of Einsteins. I mean, Einstein was a unique individual. This morning, I think we heard that Leonardo da Vinci may even be the wrong model for a modern woman and man. But at the same time, we need people who are lateral thinkers. We need people who can move across disciplines, who can move across the government, the private sector, across the academe and civil society. I see this again in my own job, both as a former official and even as somebody helping to run a think tank. Well, when it comes to going to Darfur or Afghanistan, we're blending all types of discipline, from development and humanitarian assistance to good governance and providing the basic means of running a state and state building to security as well. And that's requiring new formations of putting people together, both officials and from the private sector. So information is in abundance in our century, and who's going to look across the seams of this enterprise in government and academe to forge innovative approaches? And that's why the individual is going to matter. We still need people at the end of the day to give us the qualitative assessment. What does this all mean? There's so much out there. Again, I mentioned Google Earth, or take a look at another new website, the Global Incidents Index, and you can instantly go in and it spots 50,000 incidents of terrorism, conflict, anything that's happening in the world, and you can zoom in on it. Or again, Google Earth, you can go in and look at how genocide unfolded in Rwanda. Or you can look at your house if you wish to go in. It's incredible what's happening here with technology, but it's coming down to this individual user, as we started the morning, who's shaping some of the solutions in looking at these problems. My final thought here is that leaving Heathrow Airport yesterday, the last sign I saw before I got on the airplane was a huge placard that said Toshiba, leading innovation. And immediately I said, was that sign there for me? Because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to read into that. They're leading innovation. I'm going to a conference on innovation. And what do they mean? What do they want me to mean by this? I wasn't sure, and maybe I'm still not sure. But like innovation itself, as was mentioned by Esko, I mean, it is a risk-taking enterprise. And for a strategic studies think tank to get involved, especially when one of its I's in IISS is not innovation, it was a risk putting this seminar on. But I had a big insurance policy. I decided to have great partners, and I could not have had a better partner than Esko and Sitra, as well as our friends from Nesta and from Mitsubishi and Waseda University and our various speakers and discussants today. So I just want to say thank you to all of them. Thank you to Sitra. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience and so attentive today. I now adjourn this meeting. Thank you.